Hi, and thank you very much for joining us today for this briefing event. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Miles Celic, and I'm the Chief Executive of the City UK, and I'm delighted to be joined today by two of my fellow ExCo colleagues. So Emma Reynolds, who is our Managing Director of Public Affairs Policy and Research, and Nicola Watkinson, who is our Managing Director of International Trade and Investment. This event is an opportunity really for us to run through the work that we have been doing recently and that we have planned in the months ahead that we are doing on your behalf, on behalf of our members, on behalf of the wider ecosystem, and on behalf of what is a major national strategic asset that is embodied in the financial and related professional services industry here in the UK. What we'll be doing is we'll run it as a format of two fireside chats. So first, Nikki and I will chat about the work that is underway in her area, and then Emma will talk about the work that we're concentrating on the long-term competitiveness of the ecosystem, and particularly on sustainability, which is becoming more and more of a priority with each passing day, not just for our industry, but for society at large. Please do feel free to make comments using the chat or Q&A function at the bottom. If you have any questions that you would like me to put on your behalf to either of our speakers, please do so using the Q&A function, or indeed, if you have my email address, feel free to email that to me directly. But with that, I would like to turn first of all to Nikki. Nikki joined us, I think it's nearly 6 weeks now into the role, and joins us with a fantastic pedigree in this line of work, having previously been the head of the Americas for Austrade, the Australian trade and investment body, having also previously done stints in India and in Europe, and also as global champion for diversity and inclusion for Austrade. So with that, I'll turn over, Nikki, to you.
And look, thank you very much. And it's really exciting to be here today. And Miles, you're quite right in saying that, you know, I've had about 15 years now in the diplomatic service with a real focus on trade and investment, working around the world. And one of the things I was looking at when I was looking for a new challenge was the UK, because I think it's at an absolutely pivotal point in how it redefines itself around its international trade and investment agenda. Obviously, due to some of the decisions it's made itself, like Brexit, but equally because of some of the disruptions that we've seen because of COVID to the global value chains that are at play, and also some of the different dynamics that we're seeing in the geopolitical environment, such as the tensions between the US and China. So all of this means that it's a really important time for us to be thinking about what we do in our international trade and investment agenda for the financial and professional services industry. And one of the things that I've noticed in my first few weeks is just how big the level of ambition is from our members. And I found that to be really inspiring. Many of the companies that we work with here have got really strong growth plans internationally. And there is genuine competitive advantage that we have to offer, whether it's our deep capital pools, whether it's some of the specific expertise we have in insurance around climate change is obviously a huge topic. Obviously, our legal services and our governance and stewardship capabilities are well known around the world. And then there's also future areas of opportunity around financial innovation, such as our fintech centers, you know, we're the second largest in the world there. So I think there's a really good agenda that we can be focusing on. So in the last couple of weeks and months, what we've been
I think we may have had Nikki, either Nikki's frozen there or I have.
No, I think Nikki's frozen. I'd be happy to step in if that would be helpful.
So just as she was reaching the peak of her peroration. So in that case, Emma, thanks very much for stepping in. I think we'll wait for Nikki's connection to come back in. But while we do that, Emma has joined us. Emma is a comparative veteran, having been with us since June, and previously having been a member of Parliament, member of the Brexit Committee, and indeed a member of the Shadow Cabinet. Emma leads, as I mentioned earlier, our work on public affairs policy and research, and you'll be talking to us a little bit about the work on long-term competitiveness and sustainability.
Wonderful, and good morning. Although I can't see the members on the call, it's wonderful to be part of this event and look forward to the Q&A, which is always the more dynamic of these things. But a few words at the top, Miles, about what we're doing on long-term competitiveness. I think it's worth saying by means of introduction that the City UK, since and even before the 2016 European referendum, has very much focused a lot of its work on the relationship with Europe, or the dreaded B word, Brexit. And I think we're moving beyond that now. Obviously, the UK is a third country. We had the end of the transition period on the 31st of December last year. And although we will still have a European element to our work, I think there's going to be a shift, and there already has been this year and throughout the year, from doing quite so much work on the UK-EU relationship, which remains a strategic objective for us, but shifting the focus really on long-term competitiveness, because leaving the EU presents challenges and opportunities. And I think it's our job, Miles, to ensure that we mitigate as much as possible against those challenges, and we exploit as much as possible the opportunities. And one of the things that is an immediate priority for us is to ensure that we have a body of work that we can put to the government and other major stakeholders on what should we do as an industry to ensure that we are as competitive as possible in the long term. And can I just say that we're building on work that's already been commissioned by the Europe Group and taken forward by our EU Technical Advisory Group that we presented to the Treasury late last year on post-Brexit competitiveness. That very much focused on the short-term levers in regulation, particularly, that the Treasury could pull to ensure that we remain competitive. But Omar Ali's long-term competitiveness group will look more so across the piece, not just what the government could do in terms of regulation, but what we need to do in terms of access to talent, in terms of the work that Nikki is leading for us on international trade. And there are other elements too, technology and innovation, sustainability, I'll come on to in a minute. But the competitiveness agenda isn't just about regulation or tax. It's about this wider range of factors that make the UK a very competitive and compelling place to come and do business and attract investment. And I think Nikki, actually, it follows on from some of the things that Nikki was saying. Beyond our relationship with the EU, we have many natural advantages, whether it's the time zone, which is phenomenally convenient, whether you're in Asia or the States, whether it's English being the international language of business, whether it's our legal system, well renowned around the world, or that ecosystem that we have represented in our membership that is quite unique really to the UK, that wonderful, financial and professional services industry that we have. And so Omar's group will look very much at what's already being done in this space, the listings review, which we held roundtables on with Lord Jonathan Hill in February, and it will also have a number of subgroups, and I'll come on to this in a minute, that will feed into it. And one of them will be innovation and technology, very much looking at fintech, but also innovation in that broader sense, and operational resilience as well, which is a key issue, particularly in light of the remote working that we're all doing. But I just wanted to say a few words, Miles, if I can, about sustainability, because I know that this is something that has been rising up the agenda for the last couple of years. In fact, speaking with one of our big member firms recently, somebody said to me, in all the time that this person had worked in the financial services sector, he'd never seen anything rise up the agenda so quickly in such a short time. And I think that's the case not only for our industry, but also politically. You've seen, the Prime Minister has very much invested in the presidency that they've got coming up of COP26, but also across the political parties. This is a big priority now. So our work on sustainability will build on work that we've already done, working in partnership with Imperial College on green finance, carried out by our chief economist. But it will also look at a new, we're in the process of drawing up a new green finance report, which will look and scope the UK's market in green finance products and services. We often say, and I think we have a tendency as the UK to say this, that we are a leader in this field. And I think in many respects we are, but we are going to look in more granular detail at some of the green finance products and services where we perhaps are a leader, but where we perhaps in some aren't. So what can we do to ensure that we are truly a leader across the board? And so that green finance report we hope to publish in June this year. And we are also setting up a new green and sustainable finance group, which will be under the auspices of Omar Ali's long-term competitiveness group, and we'll look at some of the policy recommendations that will need to put us at the forefront of the leadership that I've just talked about. It would also look at the intersection between digital and tech and green, which I think nobody's doing at the moment. And we're just keen to stress that we want to be additive in this field. There's a lot going on already. But just I want to say also that this new group will sit alongside the joint venture, which is the IRSG, which members will be aware of, has got an ESG work stream, really important body of work that has been done under the leadership of Michael Collins from M&G. And they're also looking at the critical issue of taxonomy and what happens with the EU's taxonomy and whatever the UK forges as a path in that direction too. So we're doing a lot of work in this area. The final thing really to say, Miles, is that obviously November in Glasgow is something that everybody's looking towards, COP26. The UK has an opportunity to be in the spotlight of the world and to be at the vanguard of this agenda. And we are working very, very closely with all of our main partners and members, but particularly the Corporation of the City of London, who are leading a bid in collaboration with all the trade associations and the TheCityUK to have a presence in the blue zone of COP26. And we will hopefully be running events together and making sure that finance is recognised as a key part of this agenda, but because without a strong financial and professional services industry, both committing itself to these ambitious targets, but also facilitating the rest of the economy to reach these targets, we won't be able to reach those net zero targets that all the many countries around the world, including our own, have committed to.
Emma, thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for stepping in whilst Nicola wrestled with her technological gremlins, which I think have been fixed. I'm conscious that we've only got Nikki with us until 11:30. So what I'll do is, Emma, thanks very much. I'm sure that's given everybody a huge degree of food for thought in terms of questions that I'm sure they will have for you. But will bring you back in about 15 minutes. I think if I can bring Nikki back in on the call now, I hope. If there's, yeah, there we go. Nikki, in the interest of time, I'll go straight to questions. You set out, I thought, a really compelling vision of what's been achieved, what's going on, where the challenges are, where the opportunities are for the UK. Obviously, within TheCityUK, we work very closely with government. We work very closely with BIT, HMT in particular, and we do that through our group of market advisory groups. So obviously, we have one for the US and for China and so on. You're sort of reasonably new to this. How do you see the work of those groups from what you've seen so far feeding into this sort of forward agenda of trade and investment policy? What do you sense that the UK and our industry are doing well? And from your enormous experience doing these things in a country that hasn't been new to this, what do you think we should be doing better?
Well, look, thank you for that, and apologies for dropping out. It felt a little bit like being back in Delhi again, where we had some regular brownouts, but so always good to remind oneself not to take these things for granted. Look, in the time I've been here, I can see there's already some fantastic work going on. So just in the last few months, some of the work that the market advisory groups has been doing has really been contributing to the achievement of some real outcomes for the industry. The work that we've done between Switzerland and the UK to, I guess, re-establish the share trading obligations for equivalence, and also now working on the services mobility agreements, are real tangible outcomes that make a difference to business. We've also had the launch of the legal report late last year, which really does show the importance of the legal services sector to the economy. We've had the contribution we've made to the digital agreement provisions for the Japan Closer Economic Partnership Agreement, and also the work that we've been doing with the government around Singapore and the FTA there. But we have a really big forward agenda, and there's just a few points I'd really like to highlight, because we'd love to hear from members about areas that you're interested in and where you'd like to play into some of the work that we're doing. So if I start at the top, it would be remiss not to talk about the USA, given we've got a new administration over there and quite a strong need to really engage very actively with the US at a whole range of different levels. So a couple of things that we're doing there. One is we're in the process of producing a series of 6 short papers on innovation topics, which are particularly relevant to the US and UK relationship and how we can work together more actively in areas like artificial intelligence. And we're also planning for a CEO roundtable, probably in October this year, in the lead up to COP and also to the IFC meetings, so that we can really get businesses starting to talk together again, assuming that the travel gods are back and on our side. India is a really interesting one, because we're really seeing a scaling up of the opportunities in India. And of course, that's music to my ears, having come from that space. And so we've been working through the India-UK Financial Partnership. That's something that Treasury has asked us to do. And we have a number of work streams going on in that area. They are designed to help UK companies to be able to get into the market more easily in India, and also for us to be able to bring to play some more capital to help to invest in areas like the fintech sector in India, which is a fast growing opportunity. In terms of markets like China, we just had Sir Roger Gifford come along from the Green Finance Institute, and he's been talking about opportunities for us to work together around the greening of the Belt and Road Initiative. So in that infrastructure space internationally, it's a huge part of the economic recovery agendas for most governments, and we're really looking at how we can get better opportunities for our industry in that area. Japan, of course, I have to mention, because it tends to be, the one we take for granted, but it's a hugely important partner for us. And the work that we've been doing with FinCity Tokyo around how we create stronger ties and bridges to help our companies to establish and do more in the green finance and fintech space is also really important. And then there's a raft of other things in the emerging markets that we've been working on with the government around prosperity funding and really supporting the establishment of new international financial centres, which will then open the way for our companies to be able to go in and leverage off the work that we've been doing.
Nikki, thanks very much for that. So, as you'll know, and as a number of people on this call will know, we're the UK representative on the World Alliance of International Financial Centres. And obviously with international financial centres, there is always that sort of slightly intriguing mix of being both competitor and collaborator and cooperator. From what you've been seeing and from the work that you've seen underway, how do you see the approaches that financial centres are taking, not just to green, but also to the COVID recovery, and where the opportunities are for the UK, both individually and collectively working with other centres?
Look, yeah, that's a really good question. And look, one of the things I'd say is I've been amazed by the strong reputation the UK has in this space. I just got contacted today by Busan in Korea, really interested to hear insights from us and work together in partnership. And then the second email I got this morning was from Israel, looking for the same kind of support. So clearly there's a lot that we can do together in this space. I think there's a couple of things which I think this international alliance is good for. One is I think it's really important around the issue of trust and reputation. The industry is going to be a huge and important part of every economic recovery, regardless of which place you are around the world. And it's important that the role that we're playing in helping to support that economic recovery, whether it's by funding infrastructure or supporting loans or all the other work that we're doing in terms of upskilling SMEs in how to actually cope with digitalization and so on, that's something I see as a common thread and something that we really need to keep working on. But there's also individual areas where I think the UK can really do a lot and really capture the opportunity. One is around the infrastructure space, because I think we do have those deep capital pools. We have great expertise in asset management, and we do have the ability to really take advantage of the huge amounts of stimulus packages that are going on around the world. And then I think there's also other areas around the digital agenda. So how we actually work hard to set up our new free trade agreements in order to make sure that we have the right kind of data provisions in them to really make sure that businesses can capture the opportunities of cross-border trade and e-commerce. And then I think around the regulatory side of things, there's a lot of work we can do to take irritants out, whether at the bilateral level or also through an enabling function in areas like green finance, where we need to really come up with some global standards that will make it easier and more profitable for our companies to be able to move across markets using the same kind of standards, rather than having to face this compliance burden each and every time they move into a new market.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder to people, do feel free to add further questions either directly to me or using the Q&A function. Nikki, one of the things that we've been talking about here is bilateral relationships. So, terrific progress on the UK-Japan agreement. Obviously, those things then need to be activated. It's not just good enough. It's the point that Jerry Grimston always makes. We don't negotiate FTAs in government for the good of government. We do it for companies, and companies need to take advantage of those. But there's a sort of well-trodden path on bilateral FTAs. Obviously, recently there's been a lot of attention on the UK's ambition to join CPTPP, the Comprehensive Pacific Partnership. From your experience, and obviously you'll be familiar with this from your previous role with the Australian government, where do you see the potential opportunities for the UK within CPTPP, but also particularly for this industry within CPTPP?
Yeah, look, I think it is a fantastic opportunity. And for me, the real winner is the ability to actually get improved market access to a whole range of markets that we don't yet have the bilateral relationships with. And obviously, there's some great markets in there around Latin America, which is, again, I've just come out of that space, so very, very keen. But much more important, really, to be honest, is around the Indo-Pacific. We've seen the integrated review come out. The government is making a really strong pivot into the Indo-Pacific, and it's important that our trade relationships follow in that direction as well. It's going to account for around about 45% of GDP very soon. Most of our members have got a growth strategy that's based on growing in the Indo-Pacific, and the opportunity through things like CTPPP is to be able to get good market access and a seat at the table, not just for the agreement today, but how we negotiate further provisions going forward and make sure that the financial services interests and those of professional services are well represented in that area. And again, for members who are really interested in these topics and who are really planning to grow in these regions, we would really encourage you to reach out and talk to us about how you can become involved, whether it's by allowing us to consult with you about your particular interests and make sure that they're taken on board. We have technical working groups where we need to drill down into real specifics, and we need your help to do that. And then there's obviously other opportunities that we can offer in terms of briefing you on progress as some of these agreements are taking shape, and make sure that you understand what the implications are likely to be for your business.
One final question, because I know, Nikki, that you have to go, but thinking about CPTPP, and in fact this is applicable, I'd suspect, more broadly, what is it that partner countries, and again, thinking of your previous role, what is it that partner countries are looking for from the UK? What is it that the UK and this industry brings to the table that is unique or particularly marked compared to others?
I think the international nature of the financial services sector in the UK is something that is by far and away a standout. And that means that we have genuine deep expertise around things like stewardship and governance that are really important in these kind of forums, particularly as there's such a diverse mix of markets that are sitting inside the CTPPP. There's also the forward-leaning agenda. So I think, one of the things that Australia looks for example, from the UK, is not just to focus on these traditional elements of what trade agreements have looked like, but to really lean into where the future global growth opportunities are going to be, and to be a real ally in driving those parts of the agreement forward. So that means greater provisions around services and around, how we deal with issues around the regulation of financial services in particular, and where the growth is going to be. So where do we need to have new regulations or new provisions in these agreements that really support the future growth, whether it be in digital trade, whether it be in financial innovation, all of these areas that we know are going to really be the ones where our businesses are seeking to be, more profitable and to really grow their international profile. And I think the UK is known for its ability to be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more forward-looking. And a lot of our partners around the world are going to be hoping that as we join, we'll bring that voice to the table and the credibility and the strength to really help push that agenda forward.
Nikki, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your time. I know you need to go to another meeting, so I'll bid you goodbye, and thank you for struggling with the technology to log back in. So thanks very much for that. I'd like to bring Emma in again, and Emma, thanks very much for your introductory comments earlier, and to sort of take it to questions. You've talked about the importance of the UK-EU relationship. We've obviously had the TCA. There wasn't a great deal in that, in the cooperation agreement, the trade and cooperation agreement between the UK and the EU. Wasn't a great deal in that for our industry. That's something the Chancellor and the Prime Minister themselves have reflected. Firstly, how do you see the short term? Obviously, we hope to see this week some progress on this memorandum of understanding, this MOU on regulatory cooperation. So how do you see that playing out in the short term? And how do you see the challenges for our industry and the work that the City UK does, given what has been quite obviously rather a scratchy relationship at times over issues such as the vaccine or the Northern Irish border?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very bumpy road, isn't it, at the moment? And hopefully with time, what we all would like to see is a normalisation of the relationship between the UK and the EU. But concerns over and diplomatic rows, I guess, over the Northern Ireland Protocol, and concerns about the vaccine, although it did look like there might have been some progress between the UK and the EU last night on discussions around the vaccine, do seem to be colouring the relationship as a whole. That is kind of, it felt like things were certainly getting worse before they were to get better. So, hopefully things will start to get better now. With regard to our industry, there was obviously a commitment alongside the Trade and Cooperation Agreement in a joint declaration to reach a memorandum of understanding between the two sides on a dialogue on financial services, which was really, really good to see. And although, as you say, there was very little in the deal itself for financial services, that was something that our members, and they will know this better than me, had long prepared for, because I think it's true to say that we've always prepared for the worst but hope for the best. And in the end, it was a very, very skinny deal, as some have called it, for financial services. But I know that a lot of work went on in member firms to ensure that there was a smooth transition between the 31st of December and the start of this year. And certainly for consumers of financial services, whether it's corporates or investors or pension funds, I don't think they'd have seen a great deal of difference, which is good. On the memorandum of understanding, even in this febrile atmosphere between the two sides, it seems that there has been some good progress on drafting and agreeing this memorandum of understanding. I think we can probably realistically expect it by the end of the month. Now, if it's early April, it won't matter too much. But I think what will be important is to take this new dialogue and make sure that, firstly, that industry has some input into it, both prior to and after each dialogue, but also that the dialogue increases trust and transparency between the two sides. Because I think in the end, in terms of new areas, whether it's green finance or fintech, and Nikki mentioned some of those areas just now or earlier on, there will be changes between the two sides. There will be different approaches. We tend to have a more principle-based regulation. The EU has also always had a much more detailed form of regulation. But what's important is that the trust between the two sides is restored and built out, and that they can have the UK and the EU can have a relationship that's based on transparency around decision making and direction of travel, and that's really what the dialogue should be about.
Thanks for that. And when you think about the sort of challenges around equivalence, which you've touched on, so clearly we've been in a position where the UK has offered a large range of unilateral equivalence decisions. The EU appears to be taking a different position on this. Is there a hope? Are we picking up, from the conversations that you're having, that once the MOU is out of the way, we might see progress on equivalence? But also, one of the other elements here is that the sort of expectation has been that the UK will be the one that will diverge from the current body of EU regulation, whilst quite clearly there is a debate that doesn't get quite the same amount of attention going on in the EU about the future direction of regulation there. How do you see those playing out as we sort of move beyond the MOU and the dust settles after Brexit?
Well, let me first say, because it would be remiss of me not to say that one of the reasons, I'm sure not the only reason, that the government came to the decision that they did in November, and we welcome this, of course, was that it was actually a very brave and principled thing to do, I think, on the UK government's part, to grant equivalence in those 17 different areas to the EU. They didn't have to do that, but I think their philosophy was, we, in order to remain competitive, need to remain as open as possible. And as industry, we welcome that. It's worth saying we called for that to happen in June of last year. I remember saying to you, Miles, when we sent the letter to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, to John Glenn, that I didn't think they would do it because, tactically it felt sort of counterintuitive. But I was glad to see that they heeded our calls, and I know that members on this call were pleased too. And so I think we should, when we do get a policy win, we should talk about it. So let's not forget the part that we played in that. Am I confident that after the MOU is signed, that the European Union will grant us equivalence, or further equivalence, should I say, because we already have two sets of temporary equivalence, the most important of those obviously being in CCPs, in clearing of euro-denominated derivatives, which will run out in 18 months' time. So I think there's two issues here for us. What happens with that equivalence? Will it be extended? That's the first issue. And the second issue is, will we get any further equivalence from the EU? I think the second is probably easier to answer. I am pretty pessimistic in the short term that there will be any further equivalence granted. Now, we would prefer that this issue is not caught up in the politics, but I think it's true to say that this is still caught up in the politics, given that the political situation is pretty negative between the two sides. I can't see that there will be granting of equivalence, and also some members of the EU is a I used to work in Brussels. You can't just talk about it as one entity. We know that there's sort of competition between the different institutions. Certainly, we've heard EPP MEPs, so the centre-right MEPs in the European Parliament, be pretty, let's say, outspoken about what the agenda is of the European Union, and that is to onshore quite a lot of financial services capability from the UK to the EU. And if that is their agenda, then they are not going to grant equivalence. And I think then the second question is, what happens to the temporary equivalence that we've got? I think it's still uncertain what will happen with that. We know that the Commission has set up a working group that has met a couple of times on what it would entail to onshore that clearing and how it would work out in practice. And so I think I'm sure opinions may differ within the European Commission and in the other institutions, but I think the jury is still out on that one as to whether they will indeed extend it. We hope that they would, and I think from our perspective, but also from those who deal in these products, it would make sense to extend that provision, but that equivalence. But let's see, we still have some time to go on that one. In terms of the future direction, I think the dialogue is so important because of this situation, because we don't have much recognition of equivalence, even though we are technically absolutely the same. But you're right, over time there will be differing rules, not just on our side, but on their side too. And we know that they're reviewing some of their very big pieces of financial services regulation right now. So I think that's why the dialogue that this MOU is going to agree is so incredibly important, because it will set the contours of how those things are discussed, and hopefully what they could do, which is what they've done with the US dialogue, is get ahead of these things. So the dialogue, instead of being an update on what we've all done in the last 6 months, the Treasury and the Commission will have a forward-looking dialogue about what they intend to do rather than what they have done in the past.
Thanks very much for that. Moving on slightly from the EU, although obviously this is sort of contextual. One of the things that the City UK, and not just the City UK, but many of our members and trade association counterparts have been arguing for some time is a vision for the industry. So, understandably, during the talks around the EU during the COVID crisis, there's been a bandwidth issue, but there has always been, I think, a desire from the industry to basically have government say, right, this is what we see as the future for this national asset. These are the principles under which we will regulate it, legislate around it, and this is how we see it fitting within the broader economy. You've been leading work with your counterparts in the individual trade associations in the City of London Corporation, thinking about how we stay competitive, not just in regulatory terms, but the non-regulatory elements, which are just as important, if not more so, to the long-term success of the industry. Could you talk us through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say is I think there's a lot of work going on in this space, not just at the City UK and the corporation, obviously, but also the other trade associations. This is where it's at, right? This is where it's come to. We may not have been this time last year working on our competitiveness as an industry in quite the same way. We were, but not in the same consolidated, forward-looking way. We've been working very closely with, I won't name them all, but the likes of the ABI, UK Finance, the IA, Innovate Finance, and I hope I haven't forgotten anybody, and obviously the corporation, to discuss how we have a consistent set of messages that we, in meetings with Treasury officials or ministers or other parts of the government, can convey to the government that, firstly, we think it's important for the government to have an overarching strategy. That's a cross-departmental strategy, as you say. It's not just about regulation or tax. It's not just about Treasury issues. It's about what BEIS does in terms of professional services. It's about what DCMS does in terms of data. It's about what the Home Office, what will be the Home Office's approach. We know that the Chancellor has, for example, said that he's very keen on the Ron Khalifa's report recommendations around a tech visa. But having been an MP for nearly 10 years, the Home Office has a certain approach to these things. So I think as an industry, we'd really like to know what their approach is going to be in this new period. So all of these things will, as a whole, determine how competitive we are overall. So this is very much a sort of forward-leaning, cross-departmental strategy and set of messages that we are conveying to the government as the whole ecosystem, as all of those different sectoral trade associations alongside the corporation and the City UK. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And this morning I had a meeting to talk exactly about this, and to also talk, for example, about what might the Chancellor choose to focus on in his Mansion House speech in June, which will be coming along sooner than we think, and when we're all sort of let out of the house as well, because that's when that's the very week that things start to really open up, is the week that he's due to give that keynote speech.
And just so you've raised your sort of experience as a politician. If I could sort of draw upon that for a second, it feels like the debate on financial and professional services has shifted. That the time to sort of use a phrase, banker bashing, has moved on a little bit. And what I thought was fascinating was when the Chancellor made his speech in November, where he set out the announcement of the listings review, the review on green gilts and so on. The debate that followed led, even on the opposition side, when Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Chancellor, spoke, the debate that followed was very different to the tone and tenor that we've seen in recent years. It felt much more positive about the industry and the role that the industry plays. How do you see the perception amongst politicians, amongst opinion formers, of the industry at the moment, and that sort of sense of the importance of the industry to the UK's long-term competitiveness, the UK's long-term prosperity, but also potentially the role that the industry has played in supporting customers and businesses through the crisis, through the COVID crisis?
I think it's pretty positive, but I think we still have a way to go. And let me put this in a bit of context. So I was first elected to Parliament in 2010, before I lost my seat in 2019. And certainly in 2010, 2011, 2012, you know, those early years I was in Parliament, there was quite a lot of banker bashing going on, you know, in the wake of the global financial crash. When I watched the debate on November the 9th, after the Chancellor had given his very welcome speech about all the things that the government want to do, and it really felt like we were moving on from all the debates around Brexit. It was sort of he was really setting out a stall as to the things that the government want to do and ask industry about. There's lots of calls for evidence and consultations launched on in that very, you know, it was only a 10-minute speech, but he managed to do a lot in that short time. It was really interesting to see the debate afterwards. You're right, the Shadow Chancellor, Annalise Dodds, was very positive about our industry. She's got great knowledge of it, having worked on the the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee in the European Parliament when she was an MEP. So she knows a lot of the detail of this European legislation in particular, back to front. And I think that the debate has moved on. And I think there's a recognition, particularly with the pandemic, but also post-Brexit, that our industry is a strategic national asset, that we are the biggest taxpayer, the largest exporting industry, bar none, by a very long way, and that we employ many people, 2.3 million, 2/3 of whom are, are employed outside London. And we see that message about the 2/3 of whom outside London being repeated back to us, not just by the Chancellor, but by the Shadow Chancellor and others. But the reason I think there's a way to go is, although there's an awareness of the importance of the industry, I think two things we need to work on. Firstly, I think we need to work on promoting a better understanding of how central the industry is to the rest of the economy, that it's that flywheel, that it's that engine for growth for the rest of the economy, and the connections between our industry and some people call it the real economy, which I'm sure winds lots of people up in our industry up, but the rest of the economy. So that's the first thing. How do we improve on that understanding? And secondly, how do we, although manufacturing is incredibly important, how do we get away from the default always being manufacturing first? And to be honest, in my old party, in the Labour Party, it was always manufacturing first. Labour MPs in particular, but other MPs too, like to go and visit factories and see things being made. How do we ensure that we are at least level with manufacturing as a priority? And I'm not sure we are quite there yet. I think there's still some work to do. And obviously with the Public Affairs Group that's chaired by John Whitehouse from Barclays, we are looking at the trust and reputation of the industry and which are the key messages that we could convey. And we now have an activity plan for this year and some strategic objectives about what we want to do and outcomes interest and reputation. It's not an easy thing to get your arms around, as you know, Miles, but we're trying to define our agenda in this area much more tightly.
And I think the contribution you've made to that since you've joined, Emma, has been absolutely invaluable. I smiled when you were talking about MPs wanting to visit sites. There was certainly a point in the industry a few years ago where we felt that if we wore a hard hat and a high vis jacket, we'd be much more likely to have George Osborne turn up for a photo shoot. But obviously that's a bit harder on a trading desk, or on most trading desks anyway, I suspect. One of the things that has come out really strongly is the importance of talent to this industry. So I recall we had a board meeting a couple of years ago. We asked board members, what's the single most important issue for the long-term success of this industry? And I personally expected it would be some variant on regulation or possibly on tax, and very, very clearly, for the vast majority of people, almost unanimous around that table, it was access to talent. And sort of two things that flow from that. We've got the need to attract people to the industry in a way that simply wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago, because we've got much more competition from tech firms, for instance, in terms of the competition for top talent. But also, and there are a swathe of initiatives that have been made here, but the industry still needs to do a better job in terms of representation, of greater representation of diversity and inclusion. And I think what's fascinating is, particularly at the sort of entry level, we're making real strides here, but there's clearly a lot more that can be done, both in terms of domestic talent and obviously in terms of attracting talent internationally, which, given the political situation, and I think there's an email that's gone out from Priti Patel just today about the future immigration approach to the UK. How do you see that playing through, and how do you see that as an important underpinning for the long-term success of the industry?
Well, I think that historically and stereotypically, our industry, and let's not beat around the bush, has been seen as very dominated by men, by white men. Let's be frank about it. But I think that is changing. I think the perception and the reality is changing, but perhaps not quickly enough, if I might say so, as a confessed feminist. It is not enough to have a third of board members and FTSE 100 companies being held by women. It's good progress. And by the way, a third of MPs are women too. So a third is good progress, but it's not 50%. And it's not enough to have some sort of key exceptions to the rule, whether it's Amanda Blanc at Aviva, Dame Clara Firth as chairman of HSBC UK, Catherine McGuinness, who's a great role model as effectively the political leader of the Corporation of the City of London. But I can count the number of women in those positions on probably one and a bit hands, right? That's not enough. So there's something going on here in our industry and other industries, by the way, which perhaps the flexibility that we have kind of earned through this awful pandemic might help us get over, which is women in particular. We know they graduate in the same numbers. They come into our industry in similar numbers. They do well at junior levels in similar numbers. Then they have children, usually in their 30s. And then some either say this is too hard to combine and leave, and some don't, and then don't get promoted. So there's something going on there that we need to crack. And I think the mini revolution, if I might put it like that, in working practices that this pandemic has accelerated by 1,000 miles an hour. I mean, who'd have thought this time last year, or maybe should I say more likely February last year, that we would be having this conversation in this format, or that all of us would be working 5 days a week for most of the year and could still be incredibly productive. Who would have actually believed that, really, in February of last year? Now the pandemic has presented us with this opportunity. But one thing I would say as a word of caution that's come up in a number of events that I've spoken at on these issues is that what we must make sure is that the flexibility is shared across organisations, because if it's always the women that stay at home and look after the children, I'm being very stereotypical here, but if that is what happens, and let's face it, that's what tends to happen, and we take all the opportunities, flexibility, but men don't, and men are the ones in the office and then promote each other, then we won't get any further in this particular problem. And the other thing, the final thing, sorry, I'm very passionate about this particular agenda, but I'm really also passionate about socioeconomic diversity too. And I'm really delighted to be on the socioeconomic task force that the corporation, the City of London and the government are leading. And I think this is really complex, because actually it's pretty clear whether you're a man or a woman usually, and it's pretty clear whether you're an ethnic minority or not. It's pretty clear whether you have a disability, but it's not always clear what your background is or how you should define that. But I do think that we as an industry, and others in other industries do too, have a problem with the lack of progression for people from lower socioeconomic groups. So that is something that I'll be doing a lot of work with the task force on in the coming months and years.
Great, thank you for that, Emma. I'm going to give two last questions in the remaining few minutes. From a question that's coming from Catherine Finn, who says, it's a real shame that government are backing off gender pay gap reporting. Does Emma think financial and professional services firms should make a virtue of continuing to report? And then I'm going to put the final question in, which is, for 10, 15 years, we have had lots of reasons to be pessimistic, or lots of issues that we've needed to deal with. There's been the financial crisis. There was then the Eurozone crisis. We then moved into Brexit. We then moved, and the disruption that came with that, and then the COVID crisis. I'd like, in your final answer, if you could tell us what you think are the reasons for optimism when it comes to the industry.
Okay, wonderful. They're two really good questions. Well, firstly, to our wonderful city chair in Bristol, Catherine Finn. Thank you for the question, Catherine. And I agree wholeheartedly. It doesn't have to be mandatory for us to do it. And let's make a virtue of doing the pay gap reporting anyway. And I think, I hate to say it, but I think we do have a problem. Because I was looking at some figures of the gender pay gap in our industry when I was preparing for an International Women's Day debate recently, and it is worse than the average. And apparently the bonus pay gap is even worse than that. So it's something that we should be mindful of. We should do the reporting, and we should crack the problem because it feeds into everything else. So unless men are able to take parental leave to the same extent as women, I don't think we'll have equality. And if men are always being paid more, then they probably won't take that parental leave. So it connects to lots of other things as well. Miles, I am by nature an optimist. We've had a very tough 12 months. Who would have thought that we would have been in this situation a little over a year ago? However, but the first thing I would say is that I think we should be proud of the work that our industry has done during this pandemic. Not only was there a very rapid shift to, in most cases, remote working. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, whether it's bank workers who have to go in and man bank branches on high streets. But overall, our industry has very much moved to remote working and done so pretty smoothly. And I know that it took a lot of investment up front to get those systems in place to make sure that they were secure and to make sure that people could work from home. So I think we should be proud of the work that the industry has done and and supporting businesses and consumers through what has been a very, very difficult time. Reasons to be optimistic beyond that. I think we've got to get past this old debate about Brexit. I mean, we need to stop saying the word, so I caution myself. But I think the UK has got some great opportunities, as Nikki was saying earlier, to forge different and more active relationships with other parts of the world. The US, for me, is number one. The initiatives that Nikki talked about. I always forget the acronym, Miles, you'll forgive me. The C, I wish they'd changed the
Oh, CPTPP.
Oh my gosh,
It is
that
a
is
mouthful.
isn't that the worst acronym in the world? But these are really interesting sort of realignments of our interests and the way in which the UK is seeing itself in the world. And so I think once we get past the worst of this pandemic, hopefully we will see a quite sharp economic rebound. Now, there obviously will be risks of scarring in some sectors, and some sectors have been much harder hit than others, and some sectors will find it very difficult to get back on their feet, and some won't get back on their feet. But it's a question of making sure that we have there are these sort of two transitions, if you like, that we're going to have to make, which I'm excited about, which is a transition to more digital, and making sure that that brings people with it and is a just transition, and the transition to a more sustainable future as well, which again we've got to make sure is a just transition, so that we don't do it in a way that just sort of, you know, if we went to a sustainable future, the 2030 target next year, then you'd find a lot of people in the older industries being made redundant, and that would leave scarring. So there are transitions that we have to prepare for, and I think our industry, the financial related professional services industry, are absolutely critical to those two transitions, digital and sustainable. And without us operating on all cylinders as a country, we won't get there. So that's what I think the opportunities and the optimism that I have about our industry. I think that's where they lie.
That's a terrific note and a terrific upbeat note, I should say, to finish on. So, Emma, thank you very much for your comments and for your answers. Thanks to Nikki for hers. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us for this call this afternoon. We enormously appreciate your support. We cannot do what we do on behalf of the industry without your support and engagement, and we really are terrifically grateful for it. And thank you for the comments and questions that have come in. We look forward to working with you through the rest of the year, and have a good afternoon. Thanks very much indeed.